All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for being a part of the 2021 Virtual Christmas Summit, sponsored by Boscoyo Studio. All of the presentations in this room are specifically sponsored by Lightorama. Designing a Dynamic Show Layout by Seth Jones. During this presentation, please do not unmute yourself or start your video. You're welcome to use the chat to ask relevant questions about the presentation, since the other attendees or hosts might be able to answer your question, but please save questions directed at the presenter for the end of the session during the Q&A. At that point, you will be allowed to unmute yourself to ask questions or put them in the chat. Thank you all for attending, and I'm going to turn it over to Seth.
Hi, Aubrey. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am well. I'm picking out which screen I'm going to share here. Make sure I give you the right one. It's going to be that one, and I do not need audio for this one. So, and there we go. We should be good. Yes?
All right, perfect. There you go.
Awesome. So, Aubrey pinged me to talk about a couple of topics that I guess we say would be passionate about. I find really interesting with designing shows and with Lightorama specifically. I will qualify what I'm about to say with the fact that I am an AC lights guy. There's a lot of what I have to say is going to feed to pixels to some extent, but the context for me is very much sort of an old school AC guy. But that being said, this class I want to talk about designing a dynamic show layout. The idea being basically, actually, let me talk about me first. Anyway, so my name is Seth. Hi, how are you? I'm from Fort Lauderdale. I've been playing with Lightorama basically since it's been famous way back when, but I was in high school and my parents were like, absolutely not. So it wasn't until 2014 when, I got my own show and was able to run with things like that. I'm a big old nerd for just about everything. Me and my husband put together the show at our house. I do most of the sequencing. He does most of the cheerleading. And here we are. If you care to see our show, it's on Facebook at JP Christmas Lights. But for this particular presentation, which was where I started and skipped to, I want to talk about basically what it is in a yard layout or a show layout, or as I often call it, a stage layout. You'll hear me talk about it that way pretty often. What is it that makes it dynamic? What makes it interesting? What factors you want to think about when you're originally designing or maybe redesigning your stage layout? And then what you can do to make your props and your layout and your features do a lot of the work for you, especially when it comes to sequencing and designing down the road. So a lot of this really kind of hinges on the idea of what you mean by dynamic. And so, per the dictionary, dynamic things are lively, they're enthusiastic, they're energetic, but they're also constantly like growing, moving, bouncing around, things like that. So my thought process when approaching design is basically that I want to have a sense of flow. Even if everything is off and you're looking at in the daylight, does the physical feature sort of support the idea of some sort of flow and movement? Is that even possible? So that's kind of the idea of which I chase. A yard layout doesn't necessarily even have to be LOR. It could be pixels or any kind of layout. If it's dynamic, it's going to have the opportunity to move easily. It's going to give you a surface to work with. It's going to give you, you'll see this a lot in my next presentation, dancers. I talk about that a lot because to me, the lights are dancing. So I want my props to be dancers. And so a good layout gives you a stage full of dancers and you have movement and all of that. And you have options for different directions of movement even. So my first point about designing and conceptualizing your show is watch all of the YouTube videos, watch all the Vimeo videos, watch every one of them. When you haven't watched all, when you think you've watched them all, watch some more. There's so many out there. There's excellent ones, there's terrible ones, there's everything in between. But the more you watch, the more ideas you're going to get. You're going to see how people do things specific to their yards and you'll see how other people took those ideas and applied it to their own layouts. And we'll get more into that here in a minute. But a good place to start for good videos of good examples is things like, people who've won Great Christmas Light Fight or, Lightorama's Shining Bright contest. Those are obviously usually really stellar examples of well-assembled shows and well-assembled layouts. So it's a good place to start, watch those videos and look at, those producers' YouTube channels and look at what else they have on their YouTube and see what other, songs and videos they have and start there. And then also, like, with some of the songs you especially like from those producers, go in and watch a bunch of other Christmas shows that do the same song and see how those people lay out their yard differently and how the displays approach the song differently. That kind of taps into also sequencing, do the same thing when you think about sequencing. But you can look at that in the context of the prop layout and what they've done in their yard and how that impacts one another. So when it comes to the prop layout, when you watching all of these, you're like, oh, I like what they did. Oh, I don't like what they did. You're going to get that. And you're going to start embrace having an opinion. Everything doesn't have to look good in your opinion. And that's fine because it's your show. Nobody else pays your bills. You do. So do what you think looks good. But when you're watching the videos, think about what you like, think about what you don't like, and make some notes, and mental or physical or otherwise. But embrace the idea of having opinions because, in some ways, the creation of the show is an expression of your opinions and, what you think, Christmas celebrations would be like. So, go for it. So as you're planning those layouts, what you want to think about besides, what shapes you want to do, what kinds of props you want to build. I mean, there's a veritable catalog nowadays. I'll get a Mega Tree and a Marty fan or whatever the props are. Build your own. I'm all for that creativity of new things. But no matter what you're doing, there's 3 big things you need to think about with your show when you're constructing it and planning it. The first one being, what's the climate like in your area? What kind of audiences will you have at your display? And then also, and this one is impacted by the first 2, as you're planning the placement and planning your design, think about the lines of sight of where people will be watching your show from. And we'll dig into these a little bit more. So when you're thinking about the climate in your area, this is, I think, probably speaks more to people that are, I guess, doing new displays versus people that have done Christmas displays for a while. But, you're setting up the show and designing it and conceptualizing it springtime, summertime, but you need to think about what the weather's like fall and winter because that's when you're going to be setting it up. Down here in Florida, not a big problem. It's pretty nice. But if I'm in, say, Michigan, it's a very different story there. Setup is going to be very chilly. And so if I have a super steep roof, for example, I don't know, I've never lived in Michigan, but I might not put stuff on my roof because I don't know if snow is going to be a thing. The flip side of that is also true. A lot of people up north actually don't take their displays down, at least not all the way, because they're snowed in or iced in. So depending on what you're planning on putting up, just think about whether it's something you're going to want to take down and whether or not you're going to be able to take it down at the end of the season in January. If you've got, a giant snowflake on the top of your roof that you don't want there, but you can't go up there to get it, that might be a problem. Exactly that. So also your landscaping, your shrubbery, do you have any, very bushy trees that drop all their leaves? Think about that. So don't plan for, having visibility or not having visibility. So you might have a situation if you have a tree that drops all its leaves where in the wintertime you can see through it just fine, but you would have not realized that in the summer, or maybe now it looks funny, or who knows. But think about any kind of seasonal changes like that. I have the opposite problem down here in South Florida. We have grass that just keeps growing all over everything. And so some of my props that are more or less laying on the ground, I actually build 6 or 8 inch feet and I stand them up because the grass grows so much in November and December that if I don't do that, you can't see them anymore. In the north, same idea. Snow. What does the snow accumulation look like? Think about how deep things might get buried. Do you need to elevate it? Do you not? all of that's very dependent on your local climate. It's very dependent on your local geography, and kind of depends on what kind of props you want to put. Those all kind of go into a big soup together to figure out what's going to happen. Down here in Florida, yep, we get all of the rain. So we have to sort of plan for that and accept that sometimes we're just not going to have a show for half the year. It rains constantly sometimes. 2020 was actually very nice. We only had one rain out, which was good. But think about that. If you live in the desert, you might not need to do much water protection stuff. But down here, we have to do all of the water protection. Lots of places get windstorms. Some places don't. But bear that in mind, especially now with a lot of mega trees being the pixel strips. Those are, sails. So think about how bad wind goes and how well things are tied down and all of that. Very important to consider, especially with your mega trees. Wind is a huge, huge factor. But at the end of the day, think about the fact that the season you're planning for is not the season you're currently in. So it might be not be a bad idea, come winter time, to take some photos and videos of what things look like so that you have references for, the next summer. Aubrey, by the way, I'm gonna rely on you. If there's any questions or anything in the chat that I need to address, just let me know. So going to the next point from climate, we're going to talk about audio. There's audio, I can't talk today. Audience. So when you're thinking about your display, thinking about where you're going to put things, maybe what part of the yard you're going to face things, you need to think about what kind of audience you're going to have. And there's basically 3 different kinds of audiences. You've got people that are your drive-by audiences. Maybe they'll slow down and watch a little bit as they go, but they're just, zooming on past, enjoying it as they go. Then you have people that either might pull into either a neighbor's driveway, or they might pull, if we're lucky, they'll pull over off the side of the road. They'll pull up to a full stop in front of the house and watch. Or you might have neighbors that walk by on the nightly walking their dog, or you might have, visitors that come and park nearby and walk by and watch the show. All of these audience types will be dependent again on your local geography or your local city and your traffic and all of that, where you live. But think about what kinds of audience you're catering to, what kind of audience you'll have, because what you build can cater specifically to that. For example, if I had a show that faced a major highway, I would not want to build elements that would only be appreciated by people that are standing up right next to it, watching it up close. So we'll dig into that a little bit here. So for drive-by audiences, basically what I mean is people that come, maybe they'll be just your neighbors driving past, or maybe it's people that are driving up to see your show. There'll be a little bit of impact on your neighbors, but probably not a whole lot, because they're just driving through. But being that they're just driving through, your signage for telling them your radio station, all of that, if they're just driving by, they need an easier way of seeing it. Think about when they're driving by, what angles will they be able to see the show from? And again, they're further away. They're going at, they're driving, so they're not going to see the little details. If you paint polka dots on the ribbons on the bows in your yard, they're probably not going to notice that, for example. So if this is your primary audience, then you're going to want to swing for the fences with the scale. Go big, go with the mega trees, go with, larger things that people can see from a distance and they can see very quickly, because that's what their experience is. For those who sort of come and sit and watch from a distance in their cars, like a drive-in movie, don't think of these, when I'm talking about park and watch, I'm not talking about people that park and then come up and, stand by your show. I'm talking about people that like drive-in movie style. They sit and they watch it from a distance. Hopefully they're not disrupting your neighbors by parking in the middle of the road. Unfortunately, people do that, but hopefully they're not. But there is some risk of that. So depending on how your local roads are around your house, you may not want to build something that caters to this. You just kind of have to think about it and see how it plays out. Depending on where all of the angles of your stage are, I've seen some shows where they're Tune to radio station sign is extremely disruptive to the show because it's super bright and it's like right in the center of attention when you're trying to watch everything else. And so, think about, where you're going to put it to where your audience can see it, but not be distracted by it. But it's helpful when you have these kind of audience in a certain way, though, because they're sitting in one spot, so you can think about the angles that they see your show from, kind of like an audience in a theater, or like I keep saying, a drive-in, that kind of a thing. And being that they're sitting there for an extended period of time watching it, they're going to have more opportunity to pick up more details about your props and stuff and how you've done your layout. So the walk-by guests, like I've been saying, they're going to see things up close. The scale needs to be smaller because they're going to be up close to it. They're going to appreciate the smaller details, but as they're walking by, they're going to see it from all sides. So you need to decide, do you want to cater to that, or do you want to say, no, this is the front and that's that? That's what I did. I had to choose a front because I live on a corner, and I'll show you that here in a moment. But also be mindful that they're going to be up close. So depending on how perfectionist you are, some of the details, if they're in their car, they might not notice that you just have little PVC stakes holding up, your edge lights, but somebody is right there. Maybe you want to make them prettier. Don't know. It's up to you. So just think about who's looking at it and what they're looking at it from. So think about the place that your audience is looking from. Think about how the layout of your yard is from that point of view. So like maybe the mega tree or whatever your lead character is right in the center. And then think about the depth in relationship to the property. If it's a really deep, huge property, you've got to do big props and build scale and sense there. And then also think about how landscaping interferes with that. And I'll show you that here, right here. So this is my house, actually, and I live on the corner. The blue line is the through road. It's a dead-end street, essentially, but there's still quite a few houses behind me, so that there's a decent amount of traffic going up and down the blue road. The red road is a dead-end cul-de-sac with like 3 houses. So I purposefully did not build any show along the blue side. Everything is along the red side, so it encourages all of the traffic to pull off into the red cul-de-sac out of the line of traffic. And so this is the side of my house, and the red line's the front of my house. And so people, because of the way I laid out the show, they pull out and they watch it from the front of the house. And if somebody's walking by and they see the back side, well, that's fine. That's just not the angle I designed for. And also notice the landscaping kind of interferes with the view. That's fine. Just come around the front to watch. So that's that in terms of traffic and audience and whatnot. Let's talk about the props and how they can work for you. So look for items that can be multiples. You see, you've got multiple trees going left to right here. You've got multiple columns. That gives you opportunity to do some horizontal movement and some vertical movement. Do different prop sizes. You've got 3 or 4 different size trees here that can create interest. If everything's the same size, your brain kind of like, oh, it's all the same, and you don't notice anything anymore. When you're building props, here's the great Richard Holdman. Look for ways to do interesting and different things with the props. So here with the trees going left and right, he also added some unexpected up and down directional movement. But also don't let the props trap you into specific directional movements. The old school mega trees, they were what I call up and over. The line went up one side and down the other, but they could only spin. You can see that here with his mega. You can't really do anything besides make it turn on, off, and spin, because so you've got, if we're looking at it from the top down, that's how the lines are. But so what you could do is make these props do different shapes. Try and rethink how you build your props. Maybe instead of linear mega tree, it's a wedge shape. This is actually how I built my mega tree. So each of those 8 wedges is a different piece, and that lets you go with horizontal movement, forward, back, left, right, as well as circular movement. Same thing, break up your big sections into smaller sections. Victor Johnson from Lighting Up Paxton, look here at the base of his edging. He's got it broken up into segments, and that lets it create movement in terms of horizontal. You can make it spin in circles because the edge is now multiple pieces. But yeah, that's kind of the idea there. I'm gonna go back here to this one. Victor, talk about scale some more. because I think we're almost out of time, but I wanted to speak to this. I ran right through it. Speaking about scale, he's got a big yard, a big house. And so he's got these 20-ish foot mega trees. And then he's got the 8-foot trees next to it. So when you have scale and you have a yard that you're trying to achieve movement, think about the balance of what you have versus the props you're trying to put in. He's got a really big space and he's trying to put in, big pieces. But if you have a small space, scale things down, but still give yourself variation in terms of size and variation in terms of direction so that you can go up and down, you can go left and right. A lot of it really just comes down to trying to build a layout that faces a certain audience, but also gives you freedom of movement, I guess is the right way of putting it, so that your props do all of that work of being able to dance and be the dancers to go in all the direction. That is my thought process when it comes to designing. I love watching this go in circles. It's so much fun. I'm a nerd and I can't talk today. I apologize. But yeah, is there any questions? I feel like I sprinted super fast through that, but I see we're low on time anyway.
All right, if you have questions at this point, you can either put them in chat or you can unmute yourself and ask Seth directly.
Oh yeah, far and away. Mm-hmm. Is it correct? Um, yeah, I completely agree. It's for me kind of a catch-22 because my brain is one of those kinds where it's like I figure out what I want to do and then I have to go figure out how can I do this. But I absolutely agree. And, knowing what you can do and what your props can do is a huge factor. On your design, and that's something I'll speak to in my next session when it comes to thinking about your sequence design and whatnot. It's really important to be super aware of what your props can do. But what was this, like, I forgot now, what, 2007, 2008 when this show was? It was something like that, because I know the first one was 2004, but I don't think this was his first show. I think this was a few years down the road for him. Right. Yeah, no. And I was absolutely that high school kid, just obsessed with all y'all's videos. Every year I'd be like, what's coming up? What's coming? So excited. It's been a really fun journey for me to be able to follow in all of your footsteps for sure. Oh, absolutely agree with that 100%. My favorite example of that, I think it is the original example, is Carson Williams and Wizards and Winter. Not everything is on at the same time. In fact, most of everything is off most of the time. And I'm a huge fan of that. Leave things off, embrace the darkness, I call it. I really like the idea of directing the focus, which I really didn't talk about much. kind of part of your sequencing and kind of part of your layout that you enable with that, where you have the ability to, have the star singer, the star dancer, whatever, and then everything else is just supporting act, but they don't necessarily pull the distraction from it. But people they can't look at everything at once. They need to know this is the thing we're looking at, and then have just a single focal point, and don't give them a seizure. Exactly. The worse the dad joke, the more I love it. It's totally fine. And I honestly, it's such a textbook video. Like, everybody's like, "Oh, I know that song. Oh, I've seen that video." But I'm like, "But have you really watched it on a technical level? When it comes to your sequencing and things, it's fundamentals." So, um, I was about to speak to that. I actually do the same thing. Our house, we're lucky that we don't have tons of traffic. It's mostly just our local neighbors, and they all love the show. So we're able to do a pretty substantial rotation of songs. So we have them kind of broken into categories, classic Christmas songs and alternative stuff, things like that. And so in between each 3 or 4 song chunk, I'll do a 30-second photo op with not even necessarily everything on, just, I'll do little scene designs where, like, maybe it's red and white candy canes, or who knows, but that's really fun to do as well, to give people, that photo shot opportunity. And plus, honestly, I think, not that I have a traffic control problem. And like I said, I'm really lucky with mine, but for those who do, adding those little breaks actually kind of instinctively, like, "Oh, it shows over. Okay, we're good." So if you have traffic issues, that's a good way to do it. One thing I'm always scared of, most of my neighbors are older without small children. I'm always scared of announcing. I see you're talking about, announcing the photo ops, and that's probably not a bad idea, but at least with my show, I don't have a very good fence barrier, and I'm always scared I'd end up with children in the yard too. That's another thing you should consider, actually. I never thought about, is with the audience, is maybe having some kind of edge mark. That's probably a good thing to have in the planning, to say, this is the line you don't cross. Yeah.
All right, Seth, I'm actually going to grab that back from you here, and we can
all yours.
go ahead and transition a little bit. So thank you, everyone, for joining us for this presentation, and thank you again to Boscoyo and Lightorama for their sponsorship. We're going to take a brief, now 2-minute break so that we can get the new stream set up for YouTube. You're welcome to stay here or switch to another Zoom room. If you do stay, just make sure you don't unmute yourself so that the host can talk if there's anything we need to discuss. Thank you, and Seth will be back again in just a moment with